Melanie Caron, and she'll talk to us about l'Institut national d'excellence en santé et services sociaux. Merci.
Bien, merci à tous. Merci de l'invitation. Ça me fait plaisir d'être ici. OK, ça fonctionne. So, what's new in Quebec? Actually, I'm going to tackle the HTA issue, but a little bit differently from my colleague from CDA. So, most of you know that December 1st will be a very big, important date in Quebec because it signifies the launch of les opérations de Santé Quebec. Santé Quebec was created through a Bill 15 aimed at making the health and social services system more efficient. So Santé Quebec will be responsible for coordinating all the operation of the Quebec Health Network, and it will be the sole employer of the network by December 1st. And it will be you have the responsibility of attracting and retaining staff, which is a big issue in Quebec, even for drug implementation. So INESSS will accept mandates from the Ministry of Health, like it already does, and also from Santé Quebec, according to their respective responsibilities. That is not quite known yet, so we'll still have some news going around before December 1st. Okay. However, the responsibility of adding drug to the list, there's two lists in Quebec, the one from the RAMQ and the one for the establishment will still be at the Ministry of Health with Dominique Bélanger's team. Bill 15 not only did create Santé Quebec, but it did two really important things for INESSS. Okay, we have the Article 395 that now will be by law. It was impossible for INESSS right now to have assess when there's no formal indication at Health Canada. So let's say there's a drug, it's regulated in Canada, but there's no specific indication in the Canadian monography. We were not able to assess that drug, and that was by law. So that will change on December 1st, and we will be able to assess some other indications. So we will be able to assess the indication that INESSS recognized as fit for the public Quebec health system. The second amendment that was really important for us, it was the role that INESSS will play in la nécessité médicale particulière, which we will call NMP. NMP with the public at the RAMQ, you have what we call the patient d'exception, and in the hospital in Quebec, you had the counterpart, which was la nécessité médicale particulière. In definition, the NMP was supposed to be a special program to provide access to patients under specific conditions for last resort treatment. Right now, the use of that program is not exactly fitting that definition. So INESSS will have the responsibility to make the registry available for the hospital, but also to have portraits of what's going on in that program and help with the Ministry of Health to tackle a bit of the issues that we're seeing with that program right now. Okay, so that will be a two important topic for INESSS. We're also, we did a What We Heard report and the exercise of our strategic planning at INESSS. So the consultation enlightened that was very important to INESSS to focus on high-value drugs, our high-value object for the public health system, but to take also in consideration the labor issue. Like I said, the staffing problem in Quebec is really important. We should look at controlling cost and also embed the environmental aspect into our assessment. We have to take into consideration that the sustainability of the health and social service system in Quebec is under strain and that the knowledge are evolving rapidly. So the strategic plan will take three main pillars. We will guide the clinician in Quebec. We will try to mobilize them around the important issue, and we will provide tools to help them make good decisions for the patient. Three themes that you should keep in mind for the next 4 years at INESSS will be the high potential value of creation for drugs and other objects, the environmental sustainability, but also the first-line therapy. We talked a lot about rare disease, oncology space. There's a lot of innovation, but we will have to take into account what is need to be done on the first line of services. Okay. I was asked to talk about what changes we made in the last year or so. So we issue a new drug submission guideline. There's a lot of changes, so I put the link out there, and I hope you would read it and see the change are marked in blue, so it's really easy to follow. The difference between INESSS and CDA AMC is that we don't just do innovative drug, but also biosimilar and generic, blood product system, nutritional formula, all kind of innovation. Also, we have a new submission guide for the non-pharmaceutical innovation, which was issued last year. It's only in French, but I guess there will be an English version soon. Okay. One specific point, it was decided in Quebec that INESSS was going to do the assessment for the therapeutic vaccine, but also for the immunotherapy agent, the passive immunotherapy agent. It has been decided that way because most of the comparator of those drugs or that product are drugs. So INESSS will do the assessment with the NSPQ and the Santé Publique du Québec. So it will be equal and standardized for all those treatments. We did the first one, which was nirsevimab, who is already available in Quebec. We also issued last year the key step of our appraisal, and I just want to point out that we have a dual-track process. So we have the standard evaluation process or assessment process for the new drugs, but we also have two expedite process at the right end of the figure. So because we do assess like biosimilar, new strength, new concentration, combination of already list drug, nutritional formula, dressing, diagnostic agent, and generics, we have like an expedite process and a standard process. We call it les internes at INESSS, and we hope that their sponsor like that expedite process because it's a good thing for proportionality at INESSS, and it gives faster access to drugs for the patient and the Quebec health system. A few points that I want to make, it was the admissibility process, la recevabilité, comme on dit en français. Just know that it's a weekly process, and if we get advance notice it's mandatory for new drug, new indication, and reevaluation. But if it's also a prioritized review at Health Canada and an I-line review, and if you file for a pre-NOC, I can make sure that it's like target zero. The recommendation probably will be available for the first day of the NOC. It's what we try to do when we prioritize the file. So 3 conditions to be prioritized by Health Canada, to give pre-NOC advance notice at INESSS, and also to be an aligned review with Health Canada and CDA. We do activate the new files every month, so you will see that on our work plan, on our website, but you can look also, sometimes they say, oh, you got some project going on faster. Yes, it's for the biosimilar or the new strength or the expedite process. Otherwise, we activate the product, the evaluation monthly. And remember that our team is always available to answer your question, and we do offer pre-submission meeting to answer any question. We know there's a lot of new people or stakeholders involved, and sometimes the situation is not quite clear where it fits, so it's always available to do that. We are not going to do any more rolling submission. We tried this during the pandemic, and for the moment, we decided not to keep that in our usual process. Okay, just a few words about biosimilars and generic. So we have the expedite process for the indication that were already on the list, but we have a new process for the indication that the biosimilar or the generic sponsors want to take to public reimbursement in Quebec, because what we see is during the pandemic, the innovative drugs, sometimes they didn't came back to do the reimbursement review, and they are not reimbursed in Quebec, but it's going to be a possibility from now on for the biosimilars and the generic to come back for those kind of evaluation. Here's our framework for HTA evaluation. So remember that INESSS criteria are embedded in INESSS Act. So we have to take that into consideration, and we also kind of embedded with our framework with the 5 dimension, which I think you already know. There are 4 possibilities for listing condition, okay? Listing without condition. It's about 5% of our evaluation. We don't see that much anymore because most of our recommendations are bound with a reduction of the economic burden. About like 98% of our recommendations are bound with that. And there's also a condition and criteria for the public reimbursement. And there's also the possibility to refusal to list. There be 2 possibilities. Whether the therapeutic value has not been recognized. And remember that by law, INESSS, if we don't recognize the therapeutic value, we cannot assess the organizational, economical, and sociocultural dimension. So if the therapeutic value is not recognized, the work is done, but it's not published. So there's another way that we can issue a recommendation. It's refusal to list for all criteria. That means that the therapeutic value was recognized, but the other aspects that are embedded in the law were kind of problematic or too high to reach for the public system. So we put that in writing for our Ministry of Health, so he can decide if he can lift or negotiate some condition with you, the sponsor, and go ahead with the negotiation, the price negotiation if he wants. In 2018, we introduced the concept of the promesse de valeur thérapeutique. So it's the counterpart of the CDA time-limited recommendation. So we have been doing this for quite a while now. That means that it's a conditional listing that may be dependent on the clinical monitoring requirements if INESSS deemed that the drug could offer a desired therapeutic value. We use that with Galafold, the CAR-T, and recently we did this for the Carvykti. And at the end of the day, when we issue that kind of recommendation, it can lead to a negotiation with the PCPA through the PTAP process or a simple negotiation with the Ministry of Health of Quebec. Okay? We just did the reevaluation of the CAR-T. We published that in spring, and it gave us really good information about the hypotheses that were made a couple years ago and the actual usage of those drugs in the Quebec health system, but also the burden on the organizational and the cost of those drugs. So it was really informative. Probably that you have seen in a couple of our assessment that for now on, we just said that in June 2024, that for every NOCC, we will do a conditional listing, make it mandatory for the sponsor to come back for reassessment when INESSS sees that fit. So whenever there's new data available or there's something important with that drug assessment and the new space that we will look at. So mostly it will be 2 years, 3 years, we don't know. It depends on the Health Canada condition and what we have seen during the assessment. And it's not only the clinical data that we're going to reconsider, but also the economic model. That will be really important for our Ministry of Health. And that was decided after the reevaluation of the CAR-Ts, because it was so informative. Now you have a scoop. Préparez vos phrases en français et vos documents parce que l'INESSS va lancer 3 consultations la semaine prochaine. So there will be 3 consultations that we're planning. We're seeking advice on the update of the regulation regarding the fees for the new line of assessment. We're going to issue that regulation to be commented the next week. And we're thinking of having 3 new lines of evaluation. So the blood product with a companion test, it's something new that we have seen a couple of times, and it was not clear for the sponsor which way or which fee it was, so it will be detailed in that document. There will be a new fee for the therapeutic product approved in Canada and assessed as an indication not included in the Canadian monograph. Like I said previously, that will be available for INESSS to assess those kind of drugs after December 1st. So they will have a fee, we will have a fee for that. And the new drug whose patent has expired and never been evaluated or listed for a given indication or review of the listing. So we heard the sponsor, and the fee was so high whenever it was a generic or the patent was expired for a drug. The Canadian monograph had a new indication, but no one wants to pay $80,000 to get reimbursement for only the province of Quebec. So it will be really clear. We did a few pilots with the Ministry of Health, so it will be possible for a sponsor to ask for a review with a minimal fee. And that will be part of the consultation. And also a very important point, it will be the validity of the period of the evaluation. We had the surprise that our Ministry of Health just decided to list a drug that we assessed like 5 or 6 years ago. It was quite a difficult week for us because the criteria was not contemporary anymore, so we had to redo the work. So we will put a fixed period, and we hope that it will help you go through the negotiation faster with our Ministry of Health, but just to make sure also that information when it's going to be listed will be updated for better access for the patient and the clinician. The other consultation that we will have, it's really important for Médicaments Novateurs Canada. They've been asking us for this for quite a few years now. It's what are we going to do with post-publication meeting? You know, at INESSS, whenever you have a refusal to list, you have to wait that the assessment is public to have the meeting with INESSS to really understand what was happened with your file. So now that our management team is complete and the backlog is over at INESSS, it's way past us right now, we're available to have that discussion with MNC, IMC, biotech, and other groups also. So we will have that conversation during the next week. And if you're not part of any association, there will be a publicly available process to receive the comments in French. Okay. And the third and the last consultation that we will have after Christmas will be the one about the framework. The last framework specific to drug was issued in 2018. So the thérapeutique, la promesse de valeur thérapeutique was not embedded in that framework. So we want to make this framework more clear and better communicate the various results of the evaluation we conduct, as well as the expected follow-up, because we were told that we were not always clear about the follow-up whenever there's a listing with condition. So we will have that discussion with the industry after Christmas. You can look at the framework now. I put the link, and perhaps some of you noticed that we have made changes to the format of our evaluation. It's been updated, modernized, and the important information is now at the beginning. It's not at the end. And we're looking to have that 3 or 4 first pages translate, so it's going to be easier for the other provinces to know what we've decided in Quebec. Finally, I was asked to highlight some of the difference between CDA and INESSS. CDA does things really, really nicely, and they have a totally another context. We're so lucky, we're just for the province of Quebec. We have access to our data, to our clinician, to our patients, so our context is really, really different from the one at CDA. So a few points that we want to talk to you about today is that we only have one deliberative committee for all drugs and innovation and non-pharmaceutical devices. So we really have the same people taking the same decision have a consistency in what we issue to our Ministry of Health. CDA has time-limited recommendation. We're not going to change la promesse de valeur thérapeutique. We think it's still fit for purposes. The criteria will evolve as science evolves. It's a kind of a concept that we use whenever it's necessary, but it's not sponsor-driven. It's really the deliberative committee that decide if it's fit for purposes or not. Target zero, we do believe at INESSS that if a sponsor file a pre-NOC with an I-line file, that we will issue our recommendation quite near the NOC process. If they file it at the beginning of the process with Health Canada, because what we see was one of the big problem with the align process is the sponsor decide to sign that alignment only a week or a month before the NOC is issued. So that's not really something quite good for us for the HTA perspective. Rolling submission, I talked about it before. We're not going to put that into our usual process for the moment. Non-sponsor review, we were asked, CDA does a lot of non-sponsor review. I think you understand that both will be possible at INESSS. So sometime the Ministry of Health and INESSS will decide on priority, and it's going to be work like non-sponsored review, like with no fees. But there's only such a small number of priorities that we have in a year. So that track will still be possible. It will depend on our priority as a Quebec health system. But there will be another track for the sponsor if they want to prioritize, change the reimbursement criteria or have a new indication. They will have a path if they want to put that on our pile. CDA does new drugs. We do all kinds of things. That's why we have the dual process, like I said. And everyone has PCPA-driven negotiation most of the time, but our ministry sometimes decide to go with provincial negotiation most of the time because when the INESSS recommendation differs from the one from the CDA. Okay. And what are the challenging that we're expecting for tomorrow? If you look at the press, the Quebec press, I think it's quite clear for everyone that the budgetary context in Quebec is really different from the pandemic period, and there's tough spot going on for the next months to come. That's not a good thing as an HTA perspective because all the new drug innovation that we assess are kind of really astronomical price. We will have a big discussion about the fairness in the treatment of different conditions. Right now, we're willing to pay a lot more for a small increment in oncology space. Do we want to do the same thing for Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, cardiovascular disease? We need to have that conversation sooner than later because precision therapy are coming into those space. So we'll have to decide what to do. And it's not INESSS that's going to decide that, but we'll try to better inform the clinician and the Ministry of Health of the implication on both sides. We will look really closely at what's happening in Europe because you all know that the Joint Commission will do clinical assessment altogether, and we're supposed to have access to those documents. So will it help us? Will it shorten our time of evaluation? We don't know yet, but we will find soon enough in February probably. And we need to have a discussion with the sponsor how to embed the environmental consideration into our assessment. it's kind of a large topic, and it's hard to put the unmet need for a patient with the environmental consideration in the same plate. So we will have to have those discussions with the patient group, but also with the clinicians. Okay, so that's all for me today. Thank you.
Any questions for Melanie? One back there somewhere in the lights. Yes.
Bonjour, Madame Caron. Merci pour votre présentation. Hi, my name is Caitlin. I'm from AstraZeneca. Thank you for sharing the slide that compares INESSS and AMC or CDA. One thing I didn't notice, and I'm curious if you can provide a bit of perspective, is the process for reconsideration. I'm experienced with the opportunity of discussing with the review team post-evaluation, which is very insightful. However, it's post-publication. And I'm curious if you can share a little bit of perspective there.
Okay, so that's our second consultation. Perhaps I was not that clear, but we will meet with industry to know if we're going to take that meeting and move it before the recommendation is made public, or if we're going to put in another sphere. So what we want is we want to have the best information the first time we do the assessment, because sometimes we think, the sponsor, perhaps he has other card in his pocket and he doesn't want to show it right now. So that's a tricky question that we want to ask you guys, but we know that it's a bit complicated, and we have some situation when it would be more efficient to have that discussion before the publication. Let's say that you ask for the total population, but the evidence point out to a subgroup of that population. Perhaps we could discuss and say, okay, there's a room for this or not for that, or something like that. Or perhaps you can provide new information before the recommendation in the issue. So there will be consultation that will start on next Monday, and we already have a meeting with IMC and MedTech that is planned. So if you're not part of those groups, you can always send us a letter and we'll look at your comments.
Thank you very much.
Okay?
Other questions? I'd like to ask you.
No.
Yeah. Before I go to, I'm going to ask you a question as well.
Wait.
You have a very interesting pilot project on Ozempic. Can you talk about that?
It's still a written project. It's not the ministry have not decided if he was going to go through with that project or not. But we were asked if we wanted to, if we had some criteria in mind and for which population it would be the best fit to try it. So it's still on the Ministry of Health desk, and we don't know yet what he's going to do with that project.
Because we need that info.
We need that info, but right now in the law in Quebec, we cannot assess drug for obesity. It's not part of our public system for reimbursement. So that's why it's a tricky question, the Ozempic or the GLP-1 file.
Yes, there is a question here. Yeah.
Thanks. So, hi, I'm Brandon Levac from Bayer. My question is around the NOCCs and resubmission by the manufacturer. Can you talk a little bit more about timing for that? I know you had said this could be a couple of years on. Is there the opportunity for manufacturers to speak with INESSS to have a discussion in advance of that?
Yeah,
part
sure.
one, and then part two would be if it is, I think at the request of INESSS, as I understood you had mentioned, what would be the turnaround time that you would have in mind for when a resubmission would occur?
Sometimes it's very clear when we do the assessment that the phase 3 trial or the new data will come around next year in a couple of months or in 2026. So that we don't say a specific time, because with the pandemic we had a big lesson not to put specific time frames. But if we know that there's a specific trial come around, I think we can have that discussion and say, okay, we will reassess when those data are available. But in the rare disease space, sometimes it's not quite clear when the answer will be available. Is it the registry? I talk a little bit about the NMP. There's a lot of data on Quebec patient in that registry that the hospital are having separately right now that are now going to be combined. So there's a lot of things to explore. But we decided that when say, we were not lucky this year with the NOCC. Some phase 3 trial failed, and it was not necessarily an option in our recommendation to reassess those kinds of files. So that's why we decided to put it in mandatory for every NOCC. But sure, we can have the discussion with the sponsor of what will be the time frame for that reassessment. But there's no fixed time to do that. And it's sure that the reassessment has to be integrated in the PLA with the sponsor, but not necessarily affect the length of that PLA.
So we have one last question up front here.
Hi, my name is Philippe Renaud from Alexion. And as one of my colleagues said this morning, we have to be in Toronto, me asking a question to Melanie Caron in English. So my question is the following one. You spoke about the biosimilar having the opportunity to submit for an indication that hasn't been reviewed in the past.
Yep.
So my question is, would the requirement be the same as is the reference biologic was submitting? Is this a streamlined process? How is it exactly?
Okay. If it's a biosimilar, it means that there's more clinical evidence probably of that use, the appropriate use for that biosimilar in that indication. It's not like the drug is already like 3 years into the market. So hopefully there are clinical data somewhere available in the public space that we can use to reassess that file. And either the sponsor will provide it to us or we will find those evidence and we will assess them. So no, there are not quite the same requirements as for a novel therapy.
Thank you.
Okay.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Melanie Caron, pour une très bonne présentation. Please join me in thanking Melanie.